Starting, all attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm David Morton, the Change Management Project Officer within the Improvement Service and lead facilitator of the Scottish Local Authority Change Managers Network, which is now open to the wider public sector, and this webinar series is one of the deliverables that we've offered over the last 14 months. Very quickly, I'm going to hand over our speaker today, Dr. Pietro Micheli from the University of Warwick Business School, who's going to present on how can we create a performance culture through the data-based approach. Pietro's also run a series of roundtable workshops on performance management in Scotland, and was actually recommended to me by one of our previous an attendee at a previous webinar. Just quickly before I hand over, I'm just going to go through the housekeeping for today's session for those who haven't attended before. You should have a small grey box on your screen. On one of the drop-down menus there will be a question panel. If you have any issues at all with the quality of the webinar, or if anything's not coming through okay, then please get through to me on this and I will respond to you as quick as I can. And this is also for asking, Pietro will be giving a short presentation, and then following that there will be a question and answer session. So please keep questions coming in for this as the webinar progresses. And when you're posting your question, can you please indicate whether you have access to a microphone or not, and that way we can have you ask Pietro personally your question for any follow-up as well. Finally, this is a recorded session, and we will be sharing the details of the recording following the session. So with that, I'll just hand over to Pietro. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, David. Good morning, everybody. I'm Pietro Micheli, and I work at the University of Warwick. Yes, today we're going to talk about how to create a performance culture. And we only have an hour, so I've kind of split this into two halves. The first half I'll do a bit of a talk using some slides, and then I'm very happy to take questions. So first of all, just to introduce myself, I work at the University of Warwick. I've been working as a practitioner and as an academic in performance management for about 15 years. I've worked in different sectors, private, public and not-for-profit, and I've been up in Scotland, where most of you are based today, quite a number of times to run events and also to work with organizations. Today, outside of my window, this is what I can see. Or not, unfortunately. No, I've got a car park in front of me, but I thought it would be a nice introduction with a nice constable painting. No, so what I do, I work mainly based here, which is in the middle of England, Warwick Business School, and then we also have a base in London at the Shard, the big, quite nice actually, skyscraper, where I also organize some events, so you may want to check those out as well. Right, so what are we going to do today? We're going to talk about something called performance culture, which is very related to the idea of alignment. And I'll first give you a brief introduction just to be clear about some terms that I'll use, and then we'll talk about this idea of organizational alignment. Now, this whole point about alignment doesn't mean indoctrination or to have everybody that kind of learns by heart the strategic plan of the organization or something like that. Alignment is very much about trying to get people to contribute to the same objectives in ways that, of course, will be different. You know, everybody's got different backgrounds, different skills, different viewpoints, different roles that they play in organizations. And it's important that we harness that diversity and we bring it together. So it's not about having a single version of the truth or that everybody has got the same views. Not at all. It's about having everybody that aim for the same objectives, which is quite a different thing. I've been working on this for quite a bit, and the question that really comes to my mind now and then is why is it so difficult? Why is it so difficult to get this done? And there are various reasons that we'll talk about in this webinar. But one of them is very much about this, which is we have measurement systems of different kinds. Some of them are very sophisticated with lots of dashboard and reporting. Other ones are more simple. But the one thing that is common to most, if not all, of the organizations that I've come across is the fact that performance information, which is the output of those measurement systems, is something that very often is kind of felt by the majority of employees as someone else's job. So, I have to fill in a form if I work in I don't know, social services in a council. I'm a social worker. I fill in a form, I give it to someone, and that someone will do something with it, whatever that is. I work as a nurse in a hospital. That's the same thing that I do. I work as an academic in a business school, and that's what I do. So, but the point is that this is one of the main issues, which is if we want to use data and information in meaningful ways, this has got to become everybody's job. Not because we have to get absolutely obsessed by statistics, not at all, but it's the fact that we have a lot of data. Of course, it can be more robust all the time, but it's very much something that we can do and use for our own purposes and for the purpose of the organization. So one of the things that I'll mention today is if we want to get alignment, if we want to create a performance culture where everybody's trying to create something positive for the service users, then one key element is we need to try and make the whole idea of measurement and management of performance everybody's job. And then, as I said, at the end of the first half an hour, I'm very happy to take questions. So just one little note. I've looked at the list of people that subscribe for this webinar, and I recognize some names. So, well, first of all, welcome and good to see you in a way again. Some of you that have attended previous workshops will see some overlaps with other material that I've covered, but also hopefully things that you've not seen before. So this one you may have seen if you've attended previous workshops, which is my own way of describing what I would call strategy implementation and performance management. So most organizations have mission, vision, value statements about the purpose of the organization, about what we are trying to create, and then of course some of this will be dictated by law. But what we then do is that we have to create something that becomes a bit more tangible, and this is about our strategic plans, our goals, our objectives, and even more tangible is the work that we do around performance indicators that you may call KPIs or PIs or metrics or measures, but anyway, tools that give us a way to measure our performance against those objectives, and also they help us direct attention. And as well as, performance targets, maybe rewards, financial or non-financial. But the whole point is that we go from something that is very aspirational in terms of what we are here to do and to achieve, to something that becomes more tangible, for something that is broad to something that is much more specific. And by doing so, we create a sense of focus. So all of these tools do a number of things, but I would say that the main thing that they do, if they are aligned, is to create a sense of focus. So what is it that we're trying to achieve? And the more you go down this list, the more you create consistency in what we're trying to do. So the whole idea of performance culture relies on the fact that these elements are, at least to some extent, consistent and connected. If they're not connected, because, for example, we did a piece of work around values that was completely disconnected from our strategic plan, or we had a brilliant strategic plan with lots of pledges at the beginning of a political cycle, and then we started to measure only things related to cost, or something like that, that of course you can relate to, those things of course become very dysfunctional because they create a lot of tension in what people are trying to do. So shall I try and aim for that goal of service improvement, or is it only about cost cutting? Is it about trying to reach out to a wider public, or is it very much about trying to get good ratings through a Net Promoter Score? That type of thing. So we need to try and align those elements. That's very important. But to start with a negative case, looking at how organizations do this, I've seen very often that they deploy what I would call the 7 habits of highly ineffective organizations. You may have read the book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People by Stephen Covey. This is my kind of facetious go at this, which is often with good intentions, we actually deploy certain practices that are very dysfunctional, especially seen altogether. And there's an endless list of books and manuals and reports about how to do something, and it's a very, if I may say so, it's a very North American way of looking at the world. As soon as you do those 5 steps, the world will change. Well, not really, but the 7 steps that I've identified very often is this. So are these. So the first one is that the board of the organization or the senior management team develops the strategy on their own. They then create some kind of a scorecard, right? So they want to get metrics in place, they want to get a grip on what goes on, And on the back of that, they develop some kind of a strategic document, sometimes visual, like a strategy map, and I'll come back to this tool if you don't know it. Sometimes maybe an endless document of pages and pages. The KPIs are then allocated within the organization, so the performance indicators are given to people in a way that is very much top-down. The targets are set centrally and then given basically detailed down the line. And then there is a connection. This is probably more relevant in the private sector, but not necessarily so, when the rewards and action plans are also linked to this. And then finally, there is a review that gets done monthly or quarterly. Now, all these elements are not necessarily wrong, but the sequence that I've shown and the way I've seen most organizations do it is dysfunctional. So the fact that it's a very top-down process is dysfunctional because we need to engage people. That's a necessary thing. For some people it may sound as a necessary evil, but it's definitely necessary, because if we want to get engagement, if you want to get buy-in, you need to have people involved down the line. You just cannot give people something and expect them to buy in just because you've said this is a priority, or maybe you've sent an email repeatedly to ask people to buy into something. You don't engage people via email or via an intranet. What we have to do is to create a process where the strategy is developed. Of course, it will be mainly developed by some people in the organization, not by the hundreds of employees, but there has to be a process of involvement. The scorecard is often created too early. So we create dashboards and KPIs and things too early before we know what we really want to do. Then we kind of post-rationalize using some kind of strategic plan or strategy map or causal map, which often doesn't really work. Then the KPIs are allocated, but again in a way that is very top-down, and that again is quite dysfunctional, because it's unlikely that I'll think that this is a very important thing for me if I don't really see where that comes from. The targets are set, but again I don't really necessarily see where they're coming from and why we should achieve a 5% increase in something. Why is it not 3%? Why is it not 10%? And then again, you know, the more we cascade down, the more it feels to people that this is something that we have to comply with. And this is something that I'll pick up again in 10 minutes or so, which is, if we all see this stuff in terms of performance measurement and performance management as a compliance exercise, it kind of loses the whole point. The whole point is about to try and improve what we do and to try to direct attention and create this so-called performance culture. It's not about ticking something in a box and then having all the reports that say that we've been great. And unfortunately, this leads to strange things that I've seen around. This one, I have to say, that I picked from the internet. This is an attempt to map out what an organization is trying to do. In this case, it's the NHS trying to, you know, reduce smoking. And again, you know, I've seen loads of these kind of maps that kind of don't really work out. In this case, also technically, because it's a mixture of performance indicators, of formulas, of areas. It's a bit of a mess. But also the fact that we want to try and depict something without really trying to give a message, because this map doesn't give a message. And if you think that it's only the public sector, I'm afraid, well, unfortunately, I should say, it isn't, because in the private sector it's the same. Now, this is an example of an oil and gas firm, a very large one. And what they did is probably neater than what I've shown you before, but it's a very top-down exercise. And just having a lot, in this case 47, performance indicators, just put on a piece of paper, does not engage people. So this company experienced all sorts of pushbacks and lack of buy-in that unfortunately a lot of organizations also experience. So what can we do? If we want to try and create alignment, if we want to try to get engagement, then just cascading something or just sending messages via email doesn't really work. So what can we do? Well, if we want to create that alignment, if we want to create that focus on performance and service improvement, there are four kind of main levers that we need to activate. So the first one is what is called goal clarity, which is I as an individual and we as a team have to be clear about what it is that we want to achieve. So if you tell me that we want to be innovative and you stop there, probably that's not very clear. If you want to say that we want to introduce better services for a certain group of users, well, that may make more sense. But the second point is that just having clarity doesn't necessarily mobilize energy. So you don't get people that do stuff just because they're clear. To get them to do stuff and to feel more motivated, you need to get them to commit. And that commitment to the goals is something that comes from involvement and negotiation. Now, once again, if you are a large organization, you cannot involve everybody. That would be nonsensical and it would take you ages. But trying to involve people down the line is very important, and we have to do this, at least to some extent. The third point is around so-called role clarity. So am I in a position to actually understand what I can do, and also do I feel confident? Do I feel capable? And that's very much about that kind of self-confidence that we need to ensure that people have, otherwise they will not feel good enough at doing something. And the last one is about process, which is I need to have an understanding of what to do next. Now, this doesn't mean that we tell people what to do in a prescriptive manner, but it's more about the discussion over how to do things, not just what should be done or what kind of results should be achieved. If you want to have like a sport analogy, you know, just shouting to people that they have to score in a football game or that you want to win 2-0 is not going to get them any better. You know, you have to understand how to do it, not just that you want to score more goals than than the other team. So what can we do? I mean, one of the tools that is used very often is one called the strategy map, and it's quite likely that some of you will have worked with this. Essentially what it does is that it builds on, in this case at least, it builds on the balance scorecard, which is a tool that has been around for quite a while now, almost 25 years. And this is on the left-hand side of this slide, you have the perspectives that come from the balance scorecard, so financial, customer, process, learning and growth. I've put down the source of this map, so if you want to look into this book, and there is a shorter article available online, you can see what they are about. What I've put on the right-hand side is my own idea of what are the benefits of this. So the first one is that you're trying to map on a page something that you want to communicate to people, and you prototype it in the sense that whenever I and most people have developed strategy maps, it's not that you have a go and then with the first result you just go out and say, well, this is the strategy map for everybody. It's very much of an iterative process where you prototype. So you develop one and then you kick it around with people and then you involve other people in the discussion, sometimes even external stakeholders. You're trying to build this map of saying, well, if we want to achieve a top goal, in the case of a private company would be something to do with profitability. In the case of a public sector organization may well be about outcomes, and again in Scotland that's very much the discourse these days, and rightly so. So if we have outcomes at the top and we have stakeholders underneath, so instead of customers maybe stakeholders, what kind of processes and what kind of resources, the so-called learning and growth, do we need to support that? And it's very much about trying to get people to contrast their views of how the organization works, what in academic jargon is called a mental model. So how do things function? How do they work? And that's very important because we need to have those type of conversations. And that goes back to my point about if you only select a few individuals around the table that develop all these things, you will have the result of their own views, which are not necessarily wrong, but they may be very partial. They may only look at things because they have had certain experiences, but they don't necessarily reflect the more complex reality of organizations. So you need to have other people to work with this. A map should help us articulate some kind of a cause and effect relationship and also connect different points. Some of them are very tangible, might be financial. Some of them are non-tangible or non-financial, about image, for example, or reputation. And finally, if you do this mapping, you can start to see how you think the things connect and what are the things that probably require more attention, and others that instead may have been around for a long time just because they were a priority some time ago, but they are not necessarily important today. So I don't have a lot of time to describe many examples. There are quite a few. This is a presentation, of course, you will have. There are examples. So this one here is from an NHS trust. It's a mental health trust. At the top is our outcomes. In the second level in yellow are people, like stakeholders. Operations and resources will be the bottom two. In the Q&A, if you want me to talk more about strategy maps, I'm very happy to. But anyway, the whole point is we want to have objectives on the map that kind of encompass the most important things for us. So this is not a map for everybody. It's a map that was appropriate for that specific trust and to some extent reflects their own view of the world. But going back to what we can do, so one, as I said, is to try and develop some kind of a cause and effect and to try as much as possible to involve people in the process of developing it. The second one is this, and I apologize for introducing another bit that is a bit abstract, but hopefully it will make sense to you, which is this. So it's a little diagram that I've worked out, and if you look at the axis, the x-axis at the bottom, the horizontal one, is drivers. So what actually drives the introduction of performance indicators, of reporting, of performance reviews, and so on. Some of them may be internal, so maybe something that we want to do, and some of them may be external, so something that we have to do because somebody else tells us. It may be a regulator, it can be a central government, it can be whoever has got a stake but also influence on us. And then on the y-axis, the vertical one, is more the purposes. So if we introduce performance measures and targets and so on, there may be some reason that is very internal, so we do it for our own sake. There may be something that is external, so something that is outside. So if you look at these four quadrants, if you want, the top right is what most people associate performance measurement, performance management, and so on to. They associate it very much to the idea of reporting and compliance. So what you've got in the boxes in blue is a description of that. Some of the academic terminology, if you want, is the one written underneath. So central control or national accountability, compulsory benchmarking. These terms essentially say at the top right is very much about reporting and compliance. So the driver is external. So we do it because somebody asks us to do it, and the purpose is external, so we report to them. And of course there is quite a lot there that we do, so assurance, for instance, pure monitoring and compliance, and so on. And that's not necessarily wrong. It's something that we live with, and that's part of essentially what we do. But then there are three other elements, three other areas that we have to bring into the picture. And I think that the most important point that I'm trying to make in this slide is that all four are legitimate. And unfortunately, in my experience, most people regard performance measurement and this whole idea of gathering data, analyzing data, reporting, and so on, as something that sits kind of firmly in the top right-hand corner. And they forget about the rest, specifically the one that is underneath on the bottom left, which is instead an internal driver for an internal purpose. So it's very much about implementation of strategy, about identifying areas for improvement and improving the service. It is about organizational learning and so on. So it's something that we do because we want to, and the data that we gather is used for our own purposes. We then have the other two quadrants. So the bottom, the one on the right, the bottom right, is very much something that we get externally driven. So for example, some benchmarking exercise facilitated by government, but it's something that we may want to then adopt ourselves or do that has got some kind of implications for us. So it may be about guidelines, it can be about identification of good processes or good practices, the comparison that you can have because there is a good benchmarking exercise being done across different organizations. And then the top left is very much about reputation. So we may collect data because we want to attract resources, we want to attract better people. So we're able to show what we're doing. So we utilize data to portray ourselves, not necessarily in a good light, saying this in a skeptical, kind of cynical way, but it's very much about being able to demonstrate what we do. And some of them may well result in improvements, but some of them may actually be there for reputation. So if we are the best performing council, or we're the most efficient fire authority, or we are the best employer in the higher education sector, those things attract better people, better staff, better users, and so on. But again, the key point is to try and shift the narrative and the kind of the mentality of a lot of people from the top right on reporting and compliance to the bottom left, which is about what we do ourselves. And this is something that is really at the heart of this whole idea of performance culture. A performance culture identifies all four areas as being all legitimate and to some extent valid, and sometimes we deploy or use one or another. And instead, other organizations that I've seen, unfortunately, fall very much into the category of we gather data because we have to pass it on to somebody. And that is dysfunctional because there is a lot of stuff that today we collect, and again, you know, we can have better databases, we can be more robust in our analysis, but still, it's very disappointing to see how many organizations just disregard that data. And if we want to create a performance culture and we want to use data properly, we need to try and shift this kind of mindset, this kind of narrative from reporting, compliance and assurance only to a wider set of reasons why we do this. I saw on the list there were participants from the Environment Agency, so I've dug out in one that they used in a workshop that I run in 2010, and Martin Cummings was one of the presenters. And the whole idea is that what we have to do is not just to show the idea that we have various reasons for doing something, but also that those things are all connected. And so we have to create a line of sight, or golden thread if you want to use a different piece of jargon, but essentially it's the idea of at the top we have outcomes, the main things we want to create, but we have to be able to connect this down through the different levels in the organization, and also using different tools, you know, from corporate plans to delivery plans to down to the individual appraisals. And this is something that is quite difficult to do. In my experience, in Scotland, where most of you will be today, there is a lot of focus on outcomes, more than anywhere else, and I think this is great. I think that the challenge for most of us is really to try and understand how we contribute to those outcomes. In many organizations in England where I've worked, it's the other way around. So there is quite a lot of focus on process, but less so about what is the ultimate result, what is the impact that we want to make. And trying to create this kind of line of sight is also quite fundamental if we want to try to create that alignment and so on. I just have a couple more slides on different practices. So one thing that that has made me think quite a lot about this idea of performance culture and alignment is the whole idea of what are the roles of different people. And so, you know, there is always the sense that we need leadership. Well, of course we do. And leadership is about trying to portray what is it that we're trying to achieve, trying to create a shared vision, trying to get people on board, try to motivate people. But while at the beginning of an effort of, you know, introducing a new tool, introducing a new strategic plan, introducing a new measurement system, or changing existing ones, at the beginning there has to be a top-down element. Yes, I mean at the board level, a senior management team level, there has to be clarity, hopefully, to try to get people then to do something. But that has to evolve into something that then kind of supports people. It's more like coaching or support, if you want. And it's very much about trying to get people on board as opposed to telling them what to do. And again, that's something that I've seen as quite a struggle. In a way, for some people, it's relatively easy to do the top-down pushing, but the kind of change of role into supporting becomes a bit more difficult. But from a more kind of management point of view, especially the role of middle managers, yeah, there is an element of execution at the beginning. So we are introducing a new plan, we have a new administration coming in or whatever. But that has to then shift into an enabling mindset. So we have to be able to support people in what they do. We have to enable staff to make suggestions, to bring them on board, and have this kind of a two-way traffic. So it's not just that we have a strategic plan and then a set of KPIs, but over time, we have to be able to review what we did and to try to enable people to come up with their own ideas and then progressively modify things. Of course, with a certain frequency. You don't change all your KPIs in a year, or your strategic plan only lasts 6 months. But it's very much about that kind of dynamic process of keeping things up to date and reviewing them. And from staff, you know, yes, we need to act and do things, but we also have to contribute. And the most important thing is that people feel that their contribution, of course, is valued. So if we just ask for a lot of suggestions and none gets implemented, well, guess what? Of course, that's going to create a lot of cynicism. But we have to be able to get people to contribute. And it's that kind of frontline staff contribution that, if lacking, then makes the system kind of very dry and not effective at all. Another thing that I've seen work effectively is this idea of trying to get people to have a minimum level of awareness of what is going on and a minimum level of you know, background and skill. In some organizations, they even create some kind of an internal academy. It doesn't have to be something super duper or very expensive, but it's about what kind of level of awareness and knowledge do you want to have across the organization. So if you introduce a new balanced scorecard, for example, how many people need to know the mechanics of this? How many people just need to be able to recognize it? If you do a strategy map, how many people do you bring on board and work on the map itself? How many people should be able just to recognize and understand where it comes from and why it matters? and so on and so forth. So, but we need to kind of be quite clear about the level of awareness and competence. And the reason why I say this is because very often these projects are seen as, you know, the domain of a specific individual or a small team, like the performance management unit or the quality improvement officer or whatever. And instead, no, it has to be something that most people understand, at least can relate to. And then, of course, you will have people that are more skilled and competent in it. And in a way, in some of the organizations that have done this very well, they've kind of reached the tipping point of embedding something in the culture. So they've created that environment for which people know why we're doing something, and they align and they become a much tighter and closer team. And that's something that ideally one wants to create at organizational level, but we can also do this within specific units, so within a specific service, for example, or a specific school or whatever. But it's about trying to have people that understand things and work together and have a minimum level of awareness. And to me, that's very necessary. To keep going on a few practical suggestions, the moment in which you're trying to introduce something and embed it, the most important thing is that you have to articulate why we're doing it and what are the benefits. So if you're in the process of creating a new strategic plan, if you're in the process of introducing a new scorecard or dashboard, or if you're changing and introducing lots of new targets for people or scrapping them, you have to explain why. And especially not just why in terms of the rationale, but also what is advantageous. And another thing that I've learned the hard way, I should say, is that you have to speak to people in a way that is consistent with the jargon that they use. So in healthcare, for example, in one piece of work that I did, we started to send different emails on the same subject, but just they were phrased differently. If you were speaking to clinicians, you were writing a certain way. If you were speaking to non-clinical staff, you were writing a different way. If you were writing to patients or families, you would write in a different way. Again, the content in a way was the same, but the way it was expressed was different. And you know, the most important thing is that when we embark on something new, we have to demonstrate that there is a difference being made, hopefully. But the one thing that we don't have to forget is the moment of starting it, we have to establish our position. So if the exercise or this new project or program is about improving service delivered to a specific group of people, we have to explain where we started from, so what kind of level of service we had, and then show progression. Unfortunately, we forget that sometimes, and so we say, well, we had a massive improvement, but you cannot really prove it, which again is quite disappointing. Another point is, of course, is lead by example. So people at senior management level are not just there to come up with strategic goals, but are also about trying to show that, you know, they're doing it themselves. So it's not the people that sit on the side and then watch the game, if you like, but are people that play the game. And part of that can be created through peer pressure. So you always have people that are more interested or less interested in something, people that are kind of not involved at all, and others that are very much into it. So we need to create that peer pressure. And again, what has worked for me in a number of cases is you engage people from different areas in the organization, and those people become, I'm sorry for using a trite expression, but they become change agents. They become the people that essentially spread the word. So if you want to involve, you know, a group of psychiatrists in a mental health trust, well, you get the psychiatrist to speak to them, not the administrator or the external consultant. If you want to speak to, you know, people that work in a certain function, you try to get people in that function to spread the message, and that's also much more effective because it's seen more about us as people working or beneficiaries, if you want, as opposed to some kind of an external actor that comes in. And again, the communication has to be constant, avoiding just jargon that you can avoid, but also if you have to use jargon, try to use the jargon that people normally use. Couple more points. One is if you are embarking on something new, as you may do, or some transformation, you have to establish the need for change, and that's something that we've known for a long, long time. But people are adverse to change. That's in our nature, and that's fair enough. But if we see that there is merit in it, and there is a need, in fact, then of course we're much more likely to accept that change and probably do something about it in a positive way. And sometimes you can do this even just by showing that other people are doing it. You know, other organizations are doing it. Why aren't we? You know, if this is something that other local authorities are doing, why is it not happening to us? If we are working on a program of shared services, but it's not getting traction, well, let's look at, you know, across the road, maybe there is another authority that has done quite well in it. And of course we have to demonstrate success. So that goes back to my previous point about demonstrating that something is making a difference. You could also show this in general. You know, there may be examples from others of evidence of success. Maybe it has worked somewhere else in a different organization or even in a different sector. And sometimes, I'm not trying to sell anything to you, but sometimes it may be useful to have an external point of view. Sometimes because of competence, or specific competence in an area, or because someone has got an experience that spans various organizations and so can get more traction with the senior management team. But just to conclude, you know, we started with this diagram. I want to finish with this. The whole idea of, you know, this performance culture and alignment revolves around this sense of consistency. So we create alignment where people feel on board and they feel that all these elements are connected. So they do different things. Some of those are more aspirational, other ones are more tangible, some of them are broad and wide, other ones are much more specific and detailed, but there has to be a thread through it and also you know, throughout the organization. And this is very important that we do this, but we don't have to forget that the process of doing this and the process of ensuring this is unfortunately quite long and sometimes tiring and requires patience, but it's worth it because then it's when you really get traction within the organization. So I'll leave you with three just very brief suggestions. You may have seen these books before. So a lot of the work around balanced scorecards, as you may know, has been done by these authors, Kaplan and Norton. They are very much into this kind of top-down, quite rational American view of the world. Not the 7 ineffective habits, but almost. But they do talk about the techniques, and that's quite useful, I think. But to complement that, you know, there is quite a nice little book around motivation. This is one that there's quite many. And to avoid dysfunctions and try to do something better, if I may, this is a book that I've co-authored around when measurement goes wrong and when measurement actually does work. So I hope this was relevant. I've taken slightly more than 30 minutes, and these are my details in case you wanted to contact me. So now I'm very happy to take questions. I don't know if David is going to facilitate, or I'm very happy to take them if you write them in the box. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Pietro. Just before we get a few questions in, just a quick question for myself. The 7 highly ineffective behaviours, I mean, how common do you think that they are through organisations, and how often have you sort of addressed them?
Very, very common. I'm going to go back to that slide if I may. Yep. The reason why they're common is because they look right. So in a way it seems correct. I've put this on purpose because if I said to you, you know, nobody's in charge of the strategy, well, guess what? Yeah, of course you would see that this is ineffective. But the fact that the board develops the strategy sounds right. And in a way they should. The trouble is if this is only them, then that's the problem. You know, and if the board is in charge of everything, like creating a scorecard, developing a strategy map, allocating KPIs, this is where the whole idea of, you know, creating this alignment goes out of the window. So it is very frequent because, as I said, it looks right. Yeah.
So first question is from Anne Turner from SEPA.
Yeah.
Hi, Anne.
Hi, Pietro.
Hello.
That was a great presentation, thank you. You gave us lots to think about there.
Thank you.
One of the questions I have is that we do, as you said, focus on outcomes. And because we don't deliver the outcomes by ourselves, it requires lots of people to input to those outcomes. We sort of shy away from actually measuring the outcome, and we look for measures where we can just measure our own contribution. Yeah. Do you have any views on how we could do that better?
Yes, thank you. Yes, so first of all, of course, it's very difficult. And as you say, outcomes by definition are not under our control. Right? So if you're talking about the environment, for instance, well, guess what? There are lots of things that happen that we have no control over. So SEPA makes a difference, but of course there are lots of other things that do impact on what you do. Now, I think that there are a couple of ways in which we could do this. So the first one is, yes, so measuring our contribution is okay. But the then the point is that if we only do that, then we're kind of missing the point of the outcomes, because the outcome will be much broader than, say, do regulation or inspections or what have you. But the other point is to try and for example, partner up when possible with other organizations that do have also a stake and an influence in there. So you're starting to broaden out the measures, for example, and the objectives from SEPA to a wider set of organizations. So you start to measure similar things, you exchange data, and I know this is difficult for all sorts of reasons, including information systems that may not talk to each other, but you need, at least you broaden out a bit. And then there will be measures of the outcome itself. So something to do with, I don't know, level of pollution or practices in different companies or whatever, but those also have to be tracked, because hopefully over time we can see maybe a mild but significant relationship between what we have done and changes that have happened, with all the caveats of, for example, time lags. So it may be that you do something and that something then results into an improved outcome, but down the line it may take years sometimes. But we shouldn't give up. So if we put too much emphasis on our contribution only, then the whole idea of the outcomes just doesn't work anymore. So by broadening out, involving other people, measuring various things, I think it's important. And the last point that I'll make is this. Sometimes when we measure things that are not under our control, but we do have some influence on, they stretch a bit our practices and to some extent our imagination. So if you measure me on something that it's not 100% under my control, but I can do something about it, maybe I can try other things that get me to be a bit more innovative. So trying to broaden out a little bit may get you to improve your own practices. But the thing that we have to do is to treat all that data with, caution, because it is not something that we have under our control. And, the environment or the economy, they may go up and down without us having much of a say, but we have to try and treat that data with care. So if there is a recession, if there is a major disaster or something, that of course would have to be factored in. But we do have to go beyond the immediate, the only thing that we do. I cannot cover more than this, but I'm very happy to send you a couple of things about outcome measurement if you want. So again, you have my email address, so hopefully, yeah, if you get in touch, I'll send it to you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Next question is from Tracy Dunn. Hi, Tracy. Hi, Tracy. I'll just, Tracy's question is, do you have any examples of organisations who do engage staff more in improvement strategies / performance?
Yes, I do. So there are organizations that do this better than others, for sure. Yes. Again, I'm very happy to send you material. There are cases, there are examples, there are bits that I have done. Because this is quite complex, because it goes into, measurement and data, information systems, strategy making, policies. It's one thing that I've never come across, and that may sound disappointing, but I've never come across the example, the gold medalist of performance management improvement. I've never seen, and the reason why, I think, is because it is very difficult. But there are people that do things better than others. Yes, so there are some organizations that are very good at measurement and reporting and using the data. There are others that are very good at strategy implementation. So yes, there are. I mean, in the private sector, there are some examples of companies that have done much better and have actually managed to turn around quite well their situation. In the past, old examples will be Continental Airlines. There is a good example of EDF in France some years ago. In the public sector, I've come across quite a few from councils. Barking and Dagenham in the past was a big champion of all of this, and they did really well. There are some hospitals that I've come across in England, at least, and certainly in Scotland. I mean, I've also come across quite a lot of good practices. So yeah, I'm very happy to send them to you. No problem.
Thanks, Pietro. Next question from John Dawson. Hi, John.
Hi there. I'm just wondering, it's very similar to that question, are there any examples of approaches that help move performance from the top right in your chart, the external, to also the bottom left, internal? For example, maybe engaging staff to share ideas and problems while investing in their skills, for example, lean, to help people use data, so not to take decisions on their guts or external tables, but for people in the internal to use data to take decisions. And it's just, are there any examples of approach people have used to help add that shift of internal?
Yeah, thank you. Yes. So I'll tell you the general practices. Then again, I'm happy to send you material. But so there are a couple of things. So the first one is, very often people don't see all this data and initiatives and projects as being relevant to them. So that's where the whole notion of compliance only comes in, and that's where it becomes quite disappointing and actually quite difficult to reverse. So what we could do is, for example, you invite people to a meeting, but these people come from different functions. So I've seen that having people from different areas come together and see that, for example, I don't know, we've done work with the housing association. So you had people that were very much interested in the financial side of things, and there were people that were much more interested in the service side of things. Now, as a housing association, well, you have to do both, and that would be true for any organization. So what you do, instead of talking the finance jargon to the financial people, if you like, and the service jargon to the service people, you organize meetings where you get both. So you get the finance people and the service people to discuss the overall performance, looking at data together. And that's where the service people can actually see, well, actually, it's important that we look at cost and revenues. It's very important for us. And equally, the finance people will probably see that there is merit in looking at what the service is about. Otherwise, if we don't have enough users or clients, well, guess what? The company is going to go down the drain. So, but it's important that we expose people to different things. The second point is that you need to show consequence. So if you've asked me to give you a lot of data about what I do, it would be great, in fact, it's almost necessary, that I see that something gets done. It doesn't have to be huge, it doesn't have to be immediate, but the assumption for a lot of people, unfortunately, is that you're not going to do anything with it. So, or nobody's going to do anything with it. So it's just some kind of a dry reporting scheme. So showing consequence, you know, you've given me this data about the patient pathway, and we have changed that phase in the pathway. Well, that makes a hell of a difference. It shows that that has gone somewhere. And this is what I get a lot when I do workshops in organizations. So, you know, it's the typical nurse or doctor or academic or whoever that says, well, yeah, we have to tick the box. Nobody knows what happens, and we just have to do it. Otherwise, we get a reminder via email. Instead, if there is something that we could do, and especially the bottom left corner is quadrant is the one about trying to do something ourselves in terms of learning, in terms of improvement, we have to demonstrate that something is being done. And keeping people up to date, organizing reviews, organizing maybe, you know, you mentioned lean. A typical practice would be every year you have a day when you celebrate achievements. You reinforce the logic that this stuff is important. So, and the other thing is that what I've seen is often people at middle management level, you know, whatever that means to different organizations, but those people can make a huge difference. So if the message that they give to frontline staff is, you know what, the senior management team has asked for this new bit of data, it makes no difference, but you have to do it. If the message is that, well, guess what? People are not going to buy into it. If the message instead is, this is a new initiative, we've decided to do this because we had to improve a certain process, and your data is going to make a difference because we can then use it for the improvement, then the message sounds very different, and staff are more likely to buy into it. But in a way, you have to appeal to the individuals, and not necessarily one by one all the time, but you have to communicate a message that people understand that they decided to buy into. Otherwise, unfortunately, yes, the default position is the top right corner. Yeah, and people would just regard anything to do with measurement and data as an exercise that unfortunately we have to go through, and it sits on top of all the rest of the stuff that I've got to do already. Yeah.
That's good.
Any other question?
Thanks. Next question's from Josh Mann. Oh.
Yeah.
Oh. Hi, Josh. Doesn't seem to be coming in. So, measuring unit cost is key in local government due to austerity. Has efficiency and transformation been built into this model?
Sorry, I didn't get the bit. So measurement of cost, yeah, of course, it is there. I mean, it would be there anyway, but yeah, of course, for austerity. Sorry, David, I didn't get the second bit.
Sorry, measurement cost / unit cost is key in local government due to austerity. Has efficiency and transformation been built into this model?
Yes, of course. I mean, efficiency will be in all these models. So I've shown you just a couple, a scorecard or a strategy map or any type of indicator could be related to efficiency. It may be about, you know, how productive we are in what we do in terms of usage of resources like people or capital. Of course, you would have that. And in most of these models, what you call process is often something that is related to efficiency and or cost reduction if you want. And sometimes in local government, for example, if at the top of this whole idea we have something to do with outcomes, then financial resources will be one of the main bits at the bottom in terms of the support. So we have to ensure the cost is reduced. We have to ensure that this is factored in, of course. The point is that you mentioned local government. So in my experience is that sometimes some organizations keep the two separate. So there is something to do with outcomes and what we do and how we do, which is brilliant. And then we have financial reporting somewhere else. And that, of course, doesn't work because the two have to be together. Now, on one hand, there is an interest in improving services and ensuring that what we do improve the lives of people. At the same time, we need to make sure that this is done in a way that is financially viable. And the fact that sometimes we keep the two separate doesn't really bring them in any kind of, you know, good way together. And that can be quite dysfunctional. So I would say, yes, it is part of this model. Transformation plans, of course, would have to be part of this, and they will be reflected in the ways all these tools are then created. But we have to also ensure that reporting brings together these different priorities in terms of cost reduction, in terms of outcome achievement, in terms of citizen participation, and so on and so forth. Yes.
Thanks, Pietro. It appears to be all the questions for now. I'm very quickly just going to go over, present the Change Managers Network just very quickly, just to show you where the part of the series has been. If you've got any other questions for Pietro while I'm doing this, then please post them up and then we can interrupt and forward them on to him. So this was an initiative set up for Scottish local government. We've now got around 300 members and exist as a group mostly in the Knowledge Hub. All our webinars and everything that we do as on this project is shared on this Knowledge Hub site. So if you are interested in joining and finding out about future change programs or webinars, then please do join. Following this webinar, there will also be a quick survey just around the quality, first and foremost around audio and display. We'd also ask for some feedback on the content of the webinar and looking for suggestions for future speakers for webinars. We've been very successful at getting the suggestions so far, so if anyone comes to mind, then please do post them up as a suggestion. That appears to be all the questions for today, so I'd like to thank Pietro for giving up his time to present today.
Thank you.
And I hope you all enjoyed the webinar and found that useful. So thanks for your attendance. Bye.
Okay, thank you all.